I suppose it's one of those stories where you feel like even if in the initial event number 10 isn't being particularly forthcoming, you know that their position is unsustainable
Mm.
because there was just such, they weren't complicated questions, they weren't bad faith questions, they were just simple inquiries. Why would the Prime Minister have proceeded with this appointment when it had been brought to the attention of his Chief of Staff and the woman who is now his co-chief of staff that the nominee had a secret, and that was that he had championed a man charged with possessing indecent images of children. It wasn't a question I felt they could answer. It wasn't a question they wanted to answer, and obviously they've been dragged kicking and screaming towards giving us some semblance of an account of what happened.
It was back in December that the Sunday Times reported that the Prime Minister's former communications chief, Lord Doyle, Matthew Doyle, campaigned for Sean Morton even after he was charged with possessing and distributing indecent images of children in December 2016. The Prime Minister gave a peerage to his former communications chief after claiming he didn't give a full account of his links with Morton. But the anger around this has been growing for some time. The Times is reporting this morning a pretty stark warning for the PM. One female MP told him, "I can't even begin to explain how much it hurts when people are screaming at me in the streets that I'm a member of the Pedo Protectors Party." Another named several former senior male aides to Starmer and accused them of briefing against women. We asked more than 3 dozen women, Labour MPs, to come on the programme this morning to share their views, but none wanted to come on. Lisa Nandy has criticised the boys' club in Westminster as well. She told Times Radio some of the briefings have absolutely been dripping with misogyny. You hear these things about we're lazy, we spend too much time with our kids, we don't spend enough time with all kids. You really can't win. In the end, it's designed to try and keep us down and to try and stop us from being heard. The man who broke the Matthew Doyle story and has been pursuing it ever since is the Whitehall editor of the Sunday Times, Gabriel Pogrund, who's with us now. Gabriel, morning to you.
Morning.
Was it a lonely furrow to plough this story? Because the chronology, as it's saying, and I put it to the minister early and he didn't really have an answer to this, was that you broke this story fully on the 27th of December and you said, this is a guy, he has been out campaigning with a known paedophile. He'd been announced to be a member of the House of Lords, but he hadn't been formally appointed, and nothing happened as a result of your story.
I'm definitely not asking for pity, but it was lonely insofar as I guess the beauty of Sunday journalism is that you can still project stories and attempt to instigate a conversation, and you can put things on the front page that you have a reasonable expectation will be met with some answers. And when we did report this in December, number 10 wholly ignored all of my inquiries. The only thing they would say was that they thoroughly investigated the matter. I mean, we obviously now know that isn't true, not least because their position is that Matthew Doyle did not divulge enough information about his links with the convicted paedophile Sean Morton. But I suppose it's one of those stories where you feel like even if in the initial event number 10 isn't being particularly forthcoming, you know that their position is unsustainable because there was just such, they weren't complicated questions, they weren't bad faith questions, they were just simple inquiries. Why would the Prime Minister have proceeded with this appointment when it had been brought to the attention of his Chief of Staff and the woman who is now his co-chief of staff that the nominee had a secret, and that was that he had championed a man charged with possessing indecent images of children. It wasn't a question I felt they could answer. It wasn't a question they wanted to answer, and obviously they've been dragged kicking and screaming towards giving us some semblance of an account of what happened.
And the point is, in your view, and on December the 28th, after that story run that Monday morning, they could have just said, we were going to appoint him, but in light of this information, we're no longer going to appoint him. If they wanted to make a moral response to the story, they could have made that decision on the 28th of December.
Well, I think there are 2 points where they could have done that. The first was after the Scottish Labour Party gala fundraiser on the 6th of December. That was the point where Starmer's inner circle were warned about the association, and thereafter there proceeded some kind of investigation. Now, we don't know what that investigation concluded. There's no written evidence or contemporaneous account of what it discovered, but at minimum now, Tim Allen, Starmer's erstwhile Director of Comms, has said that Doyle acknowledged having supported Morton after the charges and conviction. So at that point, Starmer could have said, I'm going to notify the palace we don't wish to proceed. And certainly once it was put up in bright lights on the front page of the Sunday Times, it would have been well within the Prime Minister's gift, so at least say the clerks in the House of Commons, to communicate to the palace, which issues the letters patent, which is this slightly abstruse mechanism by which a peerage is sealed. But you could have at that point said to the palace, don't issue this document. We don't want to proceed. We may want to refer this back to the official vetting. We may want to just press pause. Starmer could have done that. And as with Mandelson, his remorse happened to come hot on the heels of the political pressure becoming overwhelming for his Downing Street operation.
And presumably your view is the only reason he's done anything about it now is because of the Mandelson story. That brought attention back on a story you've already written, but then it becomes a pattern because it's a similar thing.
I mean, there's no doubt that the Prime Minister had nil interest in doing anything when I approached him last December. By the way, possibly in slightly deranged manner, I've been, posing the same questions ever since, presuming that I wasn't going to get an answer. But therein lies the joy of being a mischievous newspaper reporter. I get to ask questions and at least see how people react. And I never anticipated that Starmer would attempt to resolve the matter. I just thought it would be there like a sort of slightly malodorous sort of stench coming from Doyle's peerage. I never actually anticipated Downing Street would act, but I think the symmetry between a Mandelson case and this demanded action. I wrote a column on Sunday to which the introduction was something along the lines of, a new Labour veteran is given a plum public role. Concerns are raised about their relationship with a paedophile. Starmer is warned and doesn't act. No, I'm not talking about Mandelson. I'm talking about Matthew Doyle. I think once that symmetry was put out there, it was quite difficult for Downing Street to explain why they hadn't done anything.
And they've still not really explained very clearly now. The Minister very much struggled when I was putting the questions really on your behalf, on behalf of our listeners, to him this morning. Gabriel, thank you so much for pressing ahead with all of this and sharing your thoughts this morning.
Thank you.
That's Gabriel Pogrund, the Whitehall editor of the Sunday Times, who started this whole Matthew Doyle farrago.